minutes a little more abbreviated. There we go. Steve's got that going. So you should have gotten a notice that asked you to comply with that. And then as we get the minutes put together and all of that approved, we will get the meetings uploaded to the website. I think for a YouTube channel is the way that we're doing that. But hopefully that allows people to tune in later after the fact. It makes it easier for us to go back and review things if we're wondering, we had that discussion, where did we go with that? We're hopeful that that will kind of improve things on our end. So I just wanted to make everybody aware of that, and thanks Steve for handling that. Let's start with introductions and go around the room. We'll start here at the U of I office, and looks like we actually have a couple of other folks joining us, which is great. My name is Kara Haley. I work for the city of Pullman, current PBAC chair. We'll go around the room here.
Rusty Vineyard, Director of Facilities here at the University of Idaho.
Paul Kimmel, Latah County Representative.
Eileen McCall, City of Pullman.
All right, and while we're here, we'll jump to the other two folks that we have in the room.
David Hall, Latah County resident.
All right,
Jean Elliott, interested community member.
well, glad to have you both here. Let's jump over to the online world. Steve.
Steve Robichaud, PBAC.
I have Sam.
Hi, Sam Gallagher, Moscow citizen.
Thanks for joining us today, Sam. It's nice to see a new face. Gina.
I am Gina Terusio. I'm Moscow City Council, and I'm a Moscow citizen too.
Mark.
Hello, I'm Mark Story. I'm with Whitman County Public Works, representing Whitman County.
Next on my screen, I have Tom Handy.
Yeah, Tom Handy. I'm Whitman County Commissioner.
All right. Sean.
I'm Code, City of Pullman Public Works.
Jeff Lanigan.
Hi there, Jeff Lanigan, WCU Facilities.
Perfect. I have Tim Link.
Yeah, Tim Link, PBAC member, also UI representative.
Great. Tom Lamar.
I'm Tom Lamar, Latah County Commissioner, representing Latah County on PBAC, and I'm also the Executive Director of the Palouse Clearwater Environmental Institute.
Great. I have, let's see, Michelle.
I'm the Northern Region Manager for our Idaho Department of Water Resources in Coeur d'Alene.
Nice to have you here today, Michelle. Michelle is taking Doug Jones' ex officio place. We're glad to have you here today. Robin.
Hi, Robin Nimmer, Alta Science and Engineering.
Okay. Let's jump down to Allison.
Allison Lebeda, NASPERS Tribe.
Right. Hi, Allison. We're still working through tech difficulties over here, so thanks everybody for being patient. Tyler.
Hey all, Tyler Palmer, current PBAC Vice Chair and City of Moscow Representative.
Right. And last, but certainly not least, Colt.
Colt Shelton, JUB Engineers.
All right, and let me make sure. Okay, it doesn't look like I see anybody else here over on the right. Just glad to have everybody here. I hope everybody's having a nice start to their 2022. Hard to believe that's where we are. Our next agenda item is approval of meeting minutes from the December 16th, 2021 meeting. And Steve sent those out on Monday. Hopefully folks had a chance to review them.
Madam Chair, I'd make a motion to approve.
Second. Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion
Just-
passed. Oh,
I
yeah,
have one note. Yeah, the minutes do say the presentation slides were below, but they weren't on the emailed version. So
right. That was, let's see. We can see about maybe after the fact, getting those at least included on the website, some fashion or other. All right. Sorry, everybody. It's been a long week. Next agenda item, public comment for items not on the agenda. Anybody has any of those? Okay, we will move on to presentations and discussion. And we'll go ahead today and just follow the agenda order and start with a basin boundary presentation from Steve. And just to kind of refresh the group's memory, at the last meeting, we talked a little bit about a presentation that Steve had given to the research subcommittee about potential changes to the basin boundary. And I had asked Steve to come back and give a somewhat of a slightly abbreviated version of that for the full PBAC committee, because I think it's got a lot of really good information and discussion. And my hopes might be then we can distribute out some follow-up action items to, both the research subcommittee and possibly the communications subcommittee as well. So thank you to Steve for humoring my request. And I'll pass it over to him.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. Let's see if I can make this work. Share right here. Okay, can everyone see that? Okay, I'm assuming you can see it.
I can see it, Steve, here.
Okay. Like Kara said, I gave a presentation to the research subcommittee a month or so ago about the groundwater model and the boundaries and how that kind of influences the groundwater model. This piece of the presentation is associated primarily with the boundaries and doesn't say much about the groundwater model. So it's kind of split off of that earlier presentation. Thought before I started, I'd do a little review of the geology in the basin. This is a generalized cross section with Pullman over to the west and Moscow to the east. Before the basalts came in, we had all the granites and quartzites of Moscow Mountain and Smoot Hill and Kamiak Butte and those things. Over time, the mountains eroded and you see this yellow sediment that was deposited as the mountains eroded. You see it goes all the way down along the top of the granite. This is what's called the parent aquifer or the basal aquifer down deep.
Hey, Steve, can you share, I think you must be sharing a different screen. So we're seeing the PowerPoint presentation. You either just need to start it or select a different screen maybe.
Oh, let's see, I've got the, oh, you didn't see the full
That's
screen.
it.
That's it. And
that's
then
it.
maybe you just hit the presentation button. Let's see if that'll do it.
I do it on mine and it does this. Do you see it changing now?
No, I wonder if it has to do with the fact that you're recording. I think we can still see your slides. I'm okay viewing it this way.
Okay, I'll do it like this then. I don't know if the animations
Yeah.
work.
I think that'll work well, Steve. Thank you.
Okay, the animations won't work, so all the thrilling stuff is not going to be in it, but
Oh,
I'll go ahead anyway.
today is not our day for tech.
Well, let me try before I do that. Let me try to stop the sharing and see if I can share
Okay,
the full zoomed in thing.
I do know
Let me
that
try
Steve
this one.
graphics are always helpful with I think that did it.
Is that better?
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we got the basal aquifer down at the bottom, the sediment that's on top of the granite and the quartzites, and then the basalt starts to flood in. The green basalts are the Grand Ronde basalts. This blue basalt above that is the Wanapum basalt. And then there's some wind-blown sediment on top, the loess, and there's more erosional sediment in here. And you'll notice there's a lot more sediment on the east side of the basin near Moscow than there is in Pullman. So how this influences the hydrology is we kind of talk about two distinct aquifer systems, and everything above the top of the Grand Ronde is considered the upper aquifer, and everything in the Grand Ronde and below is called the lower aquifer. And until probably the late 1950s, Moscow exclusively got their water out of the upper aquifer. And you can see there aren't a lot of sediments over near Pullman. And so since the early 1900s, Pullman's been getting all their water out of the lower aquifer. So until the 1960s, the two cities were, and the two universities were drawing out of different aquifer systems. This is a hydrograph that shows the upper aquifer water levels in Moscow over time from 1935 to 2010. And you can see that in the 50s and late 50s and early 60s, there was a problem happening with the lower aquifer or the upper aquifer. The water levels were going down really quick. Some of the wells were going dry. The folks on the Moscow side that were pumping out of this aquifer grew concerned. And so they formed a committee, a water resources committee of the city of Moscow, to try to figure out what to do about it. One of the things they did is they hired a consultant to look into the water situation. This consultant said that a serious situation existed, and UI and city has collaborated to try to come up with ways to get new water or to remedy the situation. The committee was, since this was all on the upper aquifer side, which is the Idaho side, it was the mayor of Moscow, city engineers, city of Moscow, the UI plant engineer, and one of the businessmen, prominent businessmen from the city of Moscow, Everett Will. So at this point, the committee was all focused on the Idaho side. So boundaries didn't really play into things when both cities and universities were kind of drawing from different aquifers. The conclusions from this consultant report said that there's a limited amount of groundwater, but there is considerable water left. They made recommendations, and one of the recommendations was that they should drill their well number 6, which was then tapping the upper aquifer, down to the lower aquifer to see if they could find water in the lower aquifer to take the pressure off the upper aquifer. They also, I'll note here, said that what you need to do is continue accumulating data, which will be needed in the long-range program. So that's something that's been going on ever since and is going on today, thanks to PBEC and a lot of the research that gets funded. So water levels are going down. They decide they need to do something about it. It's recommended that they drill into the deep aquifer. 1959, Moscow drills well 6 down into the deep aquifer, starts pumping from the lower aquifer. A few years later, UI drills well number 3 into the lower aquifer, and they too start pumping from the lower aquifer. And you can see, sure enough, once they quit pumping so much out of the upper aquifer starts to recover. So problem solved. Now that we have water from the lower aquifer, our upper aquifer is coming back, everybody's happy. But the problem wasn't really solved, because when they started pumping from the lower aquifer, all they did was jump into an aquifer system that had its own problem, which was the problem from the Pullman and WSU side of a steadily declining lower aquifer. Now, these are two different axes. So really, the lower aquifer water levels, you can see the scale is 200 feet lower than the upper aquifer. So if these were both on the same scale, this lower aquifer would be down here. The water levels are lower in the lower aquifer. But when Moscow got out of the upper aquifer and moved to the lower aquifer, they didn't really solve their problem. They just kind of transferred it to the lower aquifer. So it became more important then that they start talking about a basin boundary that encompassed both cities and universities from both sides of the border. Now, the geologists, they kind of knew about this all along because they kind of understood how the basalts had come into the basin. And so in their literature, they actually acknowledged that there wasn't a westward extension of the Moscow Basin, and that was into the city of Pullman. And so the geologists had known about this, and the hydrologists had for a long time, but the people who lived in the cities didn't really realize it until that point. There's another one that shows that Moscow is part of a larger Moscow-Pullman Basin in Idaho and Washington. So it was becoming apparent that it wasn't just a UI Moscow problem, it was a UI WSU Moscow Pullman problem. And that's when the Water Resources Committee came about to kind of solve it as a basin as opposed to just one side of the state line or another. So in 1979, the USGS made a groundwater model in collaboration with the Water Resources Committee and Ecology. And the Barker model considered the basin to be bounded by this thick black line here. And you can see that the basin wasn't considered to go out to Colfax. It stopped somewhere around Smoot Hill. The basin wasn't considered to make it all the way to Palouse. It stopped just north of the Kamiak Gap. And the basin wasn't considered to make it all the way to the Snake River. So this is what Barker thought the basin boundary should be. That model didn't work as well as they had hoped, and it underpredicted decline. So in 1990, they had another model developed, the LUM model. And you can see that the LUM model considered a much bigger area for modeling. It went out past Colfax. It went out all the way to the other side of the Palouse River, and it went down to the Snake River. And you can see the boundaries that were used in the model. Part of the model considered that there was leakage from the lower aquifer through the walls of the Snake River Canyon into the Snake River, which we now know isn't true. And it also considered that the basin went all the way out to Colfax, which we now also isn't true. In 1992, the Groundwater Management Plan comes out. And so the Groundwater Management Committee, the Pullman-Moscow Water Resources Committee, had to define the basin with some type of a boundary. You can see some kind of political thinking that went into this basin, because this basin used parts of the LUM model, which was the 1990 model, but they pulled the boundary back to the other side of Colfax. And they also pulled the boundary back from north of the river to the other side of Palouse. So you can see some kind of political thinking going into this boundary, because Palouse and Colfax weren't signatories to the Groundwater Management Plan. So the Groundwater Management Plan kind of had to have a boundary that bounded the entities that were signatories to the plan. So this is where we start to see some political considerations coming into the boundary, and maybe some abandonment of some of the hydrogeological principles. 1999, by then, the Pullman-Moscow Water Resources Committee was known as PBAC, and the annual report from 1999 shows this as the boundary. And so they've gone back out and they've included Palouse and Colfax inside of the basin. And again, you might be seeing some political considerations coming into play, or maybe it was just some hydrogeological thinking that went in. We don't really have any documentation for how this boundary was drawn or why. The next year, you see another boundary in the annual report, and you can see that there may have been discussions that the boundary may not make it out to Colfax and Palouse. This one looks more like that Barker boundary from the late 70s. And so there's a question here: how far does the boundary go to the west? It may not make it all the way to the Snake River like the LUM model said. It may not make it all the way to Colfax like the LUM model said. So this is where the political boundary and the hydrogeological understanding are kind of coming together again to question where the boundary might be. 2001, we get this really weird looking boundary where we see a dotted line that splits kind of along the state line. And I don't know where this would have come from, but it made it into the 2001 PBAC annual report. So the boundary's been kind of fluid over time, and it's been kind of a mixture of technical and political considerations that go into what's being shown as the boundary. Ever since 2005, what PBAC's been using as their boundary is what's shown here in the 2002 to 2005 groundwater use report. And you can see that in this boundary, it goes out past Colfax and back up all the way to Garfield again. So it's taken this grander boundary, but it has pulled back from the Snake River, because by now we're sure that we're not seeing lower aquifer water seeping out the walls of the Snake River Canyon. So we know that the water isn't making it to Snake River through the canyon walls. So again, it's kind of a combination, but it's mostly a political boundary. So it's always kind of been a mismatch between political boundary and hydrogeologic boundary. And in the last year or so, I've been having discussions with John Bush, and John Bush has been around studying the geology and the hydrogeology since the early 70s. And I finally got him to put pencil to paper about what he really considered the groundwater boundary to be for the lower aquifer system for the cities and the universities. And this is the sketch that he came up with. So this is the current understanding, according to the latest research and the longest term geological evidence that we have, of what the lower aquifer basin boundary would be. You can see that it doesn't make it out to Colfax, nowhere near. It stops at Smoot Hill. It does make it to Palouse, because we have evidence now that the hydrograph in Palouse is similar to that in Pullman and Moscow. We have geologic evidence that goes across the gap that shows that the geology is consistent between the gap and Palouse, and there is Grand Ronde basalt going through that gap. And we have research that shows there's water not leaking out through the canyon walls in the Snake River. So this is the current thinking on what the boundary hydrogeologically at least should be, and potentially politically as well. This starts with kind of a time lapse of each boundary being laid on top of the previous boundary. So we have the Barker boundary at first, which is kind of similar to what the latest thinking is, except the latest thinking makes it all the way out to Palouse. And the latest thinking goes to the other side of Union Flat Creek, because we now have monitoring wells on the other side of Union Flat Creek that have the same water level trends as those in Moscow and Pullman. Now, the Barker model extended the model boundaries out beyond what the basin was considered and used what was called a barrier zone in here. So Barker considered that there was a zone that was restricting the flow of water to the Snake River. And that's why the water wasn't making it to the Snake River. The Lum model abandoned this thinking and just went ahead and let the water get out to the Snake River. But Barker had a barrier zone in here. You can see that the Lum model really takes into account a much bigger area than the Barker model did, and it includes the Snake River escape here. So the Lum model was a lot different than the Barker model. No better, but it was a lot different. And you see the PBAC boundary from 2005 up until today, and it uses the research that showed that the water wasn't making it to the Snake, but it still left the boundary way out here to the north and to the west from what the hydrogeology would say today. This is the model that the WSU model, groundwater model boundary that the new model uses. And you can see that it uses kind of a combination of Barker and Lum boundaries. It goes way west, way past Colfax to the west, but it restricts the flow to the southwest like Barker did, and it restricts the flow to the north like Barker did. So it's kind of a combination of things from the very early models, but it doesn't encompass our new thinking that says the water doesn't make it past Smoot Hill. Colfax is not inside hydrogeologically the Pullman-Moscow Basin. And Palouse needs to be contained within the basin because it is sharing the same water system as these two cities. So this is what the area of interest is for the WSU model. So even though they modeled a grand, larger area, they really were only interested in what was going on in the center of the basin. And you can see there's this common area to all of the boundaries that encompasses the middle. All we're talking about is what happens on the edges of the boundary, and especially to the west and the north. We know that the granite and the quartzite is going to encompass the basin on the east and the south and the north. And here's the bush boundary, what I consider the bush boundary, and this is the one that I consider the preferred boundary going forward, because it illustrates what the current thinking is about where the water is that's being shared as a common resource between the people that live in the basin. So I would propose that that be the boundary that PBAC adopt going forward when they send the message out to the community about who it is that's impacted by the pumping and the water supply alternatives going forward. So there's some takeaways from this. First one is our understanding the basin has grown with time, and thanks to a lot of time and effort and money that's been put in by members of the community and PBAC, we've learned a lot since the 70s. And so we know a lot more than we did back then about where the water is and where it isn't and where it's going and where it's not going. We need to use the current understanding when we relay this information to the community so that they understand what the current understanding is, and they're not still operating on things that were going on or being thought 50, 60 years ago. We now know Colfax is not inside the basin, and we now know that Palouse is inside the basin. So these are different from what some people may have considered the basin in the past, and the message needs to go out. Things are not the same as they have been in the past. And the PBAC boundary needs to be updated from what it's showing right now. A bonus takeaway, of course, is that the boundary configured in the WSU groundwater model is correct. So any kind of results that come from that groundwater model should be kind of considered suspect at this point until we get a better configuration for that model. we can't really count on that, giving us good projections for what might happen in the future based on our groundwater pumping scenarios. So I went through that as quickly as I could. If there are any questions, I'll try to field them now.
Hey, Steve, can you, you may have said this and I just missed it. You gave a lot of information about how we determine Palouse is in. How did we determine Colfax is not?
The water levels in Colfax are like 300 feet lower than the water levels in the rest of the basin. And the wells in the Colfax area, they go through the stratum that the wells in the main basin go through without getting good water production. So they can only get about 400 gallons a minute in Colfax when they go through those layers. Whereas in the Moscow Pullman area, there's 2,000, between 1 and 2,000 gallons a minute that they can get out of those strata. And when you see a sharp water level decline in a relatively short horizontal distance, that's telling you that the gradient is really steep, so that there's something that's restricting the flow from going to the west. That's what that sharp water level change is about. And it's thought that the Smoot Hill, let's see if I can go back to where some of the boundaries are. If I go back to, I'll just go back to this one. Sorry, I'm not a Zoom expert. The thinking is that there are structural features. There are folds or possibly faults in this area that are restricting water flow from going to the southwest. Some people believe that there's kind of a ring of high basement that goes around Kamiak Butte, Smoot Hill, and it heads down this way and comes out at Granite Point on the river and comes around this way. And there's also dikes in this area. And when dikes come in, they can be restriction to groundwater flow. So the geology is telling us that there are restrictions to flow, and the hydrology is telling us that there are restrictions to flow, and the fact that the water levels aren't declining in Colfax like they are in Moscow and Pullman. The water levels are stable in Colfax, are telling us that Colfax is not in the basin. It doesn't behave the same as the wells in the basin do. So all of that evidence kind of combined tells us Colfax is out.
And Steve, this is Paul. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Do you remember, was that John Bush that did some work out in the Glenwood Springs area? I can't remember. And essentially he used it, or maybe it was Dale Ralston. He used essentially like a wine box that this area of the aquifer or the basin was really compartmentalized. Do you remember that work?
Yeah, I don't think John Bush did that. Glenwood Springs is, I think John Bush calls it a no man's land because it's really weird behavior. Jim Oginski, who is retired from UI, he had a lot of graduate students working research using pumping tests. And the newer research that came out of that work indicated that the aquifer is compartmentalized, and there's a compartment to the west and north, which would include Colfax, that's separate from the other compartments. They came up with 5 different compartments.
Yeah.
And each compartment is not absolutely separated from the other compartments. They leak across compartment boundaries, but the leakage rate is really slow. So effectively, you're seeing a solid boundary between compartments, but over longer term periods, there is leakage between the compartments.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve. Good, really good information though, that evolution of the boundary, I think is really helpful.
Other questions for Steve?
Yeah, Steve, this is Sam Gallagher. I was curious if you could elaborate on like why is the WSU model suspect, or why theirs is so much larger and expanding past Colfax? Like what information was pushing that boundary?
The person who came up with the boundary definition has moved on, so we can't really say for certain. it appears that he maybe didn't tap into some of the newer research that shows what's been learned about the connection to Palouse and the lack of connection to Colfax. And part of it is a modeling artifact where if you don't really know what's happening in a model, if you put the boundary far enough out from the area that you're interested in, then it doesn't really matter where you put the boundary because it's so far away, it's not going to have a lot of influence in your area of interest. So
Okay.
in the western end, they moved it out to keep it away from the area of interest, but they hadn't looked closely enough at the new research to take into account the northern boundary.
Thanks.
Great question, Sam. Other questions? I hear somebody starting to talk.
Yeah, sorry. This is Lauren Kirkpatrick that's working on the groundwater model right now. Could it just be a difference in boundary or area dimensions? Wouldn't it just be, because the only thing that we use in terms of the boundary is the square mileage of the area. So just putting in that different amount, we should be able to calibrate it and do sensitivity tests and see if it comes out to what you guys are getting in your hydrographs.
Hi, Lauren, this is Steve. When I was talking about the WSU groundwater model, I was talking about the Nick Engdahl model and not the systems
Oh.
model.
Okay, I was like,
yes,
wait,
you
we
may-
don't
you may-
use the boundary.
You may need to do some aerial changes in your model if the committee decides to take this new boundary into consideration. But the groundwater model that Nick Engdahl is coming up with is what I meant. So sorry for not making that distinction.
No, that's totally fine. I was just checking. So, okay.
Okay.
Steve, this is Mark. Thanks for the presentation. Actually, Bush's current model looks like it better fits a lot of our observed phenomena anyway. Are we at a point where we want to somehow adopt this new boundary as the most current or most, I'm searching for the right words, for the best fit model area for our basin as a result of this work that John Bush has done and that we're looking at right now? Is that kind of where we're headed with this?
That would be, as technical advisor, that would be my recommendation. One caveat that John has, because he's been around for 50 years and he's proven himself wrong several times,
Yes.
is there still is uncertainty in any boundary that you draw. And so
Correct.
this is the latest, greatest current thinking boundary, but it could change down the road once we learn or if we learn more about things.
Well, that's exactly why I was struggling for the right words, to be honest. Having watched this for a lot of years myself too.
Steve, did that drawing that John Bush produced come with any sort of write-up that would explain his assumptions and how he arrived at that particular boundary? Perhaps having that documented might be of use for future efforts.
Well, we don't have a formal document yet, but I have a lot of email correspondence and little pieces. I can put those together. I can talk to Professor Bush about whether he wants to formalize that, or I can at very least put the pieces together and they can be a part of a package that gets put into the research database. But yeah, it needs to be available down the road so that people can look at it, criticize it, evaluate it, adopt it or reject it, and move on. And so we need to have documentation of where it came from, yes.
I think it'd be helpful too to help communicate the, if we are adjusting boundaries, having this, the justification as to why is good for public relations, if nothing else.
Kara, I have a question for Steve. The right there between Smoot Hill and Kamiak Butte is the location of a piece of property that PCEI owns. It's the Rose Creek Nature Preserve. It's 22 acres and it's right at the base of Smoot Hill and a few miles away from Kamiak Butte. It's before the confluence of Rose Creek and 4 Mile Creek. And it looks like it's right on the line where your red line is there, or very close to that. There is a piece of the creek itself where it flows right over a piece of basalt. So we know right at that point, the basalt is very high or close to the surface at a low point in elevation as since the creek goes over there. I'm just wondering if anybody's ever looked at any wells or water sampling or any sort of information to see if that's it would indicate an edge of the aquifer or not.
I can ask Professor Bush about that, Tom. If you can recall back in, I think it's probably 2006, when there was a project to see whether there could be passive recharge off the south flank of Kamiak Butte. One of the wells that they looked at was Rod McIntosh's well, and that's close to the same vicinity as that.
Yeah, that's right.
One of the things that happens in that area is there's another basalt flow called the Rosa flow that pinched out in that area. So it came up against a high and then it kind of stopped and petered out and didn't make it into the main basin. So what you may be seeing near the confluence there might be Wanapum basalt, it might be Rosa basalt. And so I don't know whether anything has been checked, but I can ask Bush about it because he's wandered all over out there. And if anyone
Yeah.
knows, he'll know.
Okay, well, if somebody wants to do some sampling, let me know, because we could, there is a well there too, and somebody could be sampling that water well.
Okay.
So, and looking at the rocks or whatever. So let me know.
Do you know, Tom, if PCEI is the well owner, who's the registered owner on that? To see if there's a well log?
Well, we should be, we own the property where the well is. I actually don't know if I have the well records for that particular well. I know that we have the well records for the nature center here in Moscow, but I don't recall seeing the well records for that one, but
Okay, I'll find out from Bush what the deal is out there.
okay, thanks.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the address is Shawnee Road, so, and I can get you more specifics if you need it.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Thanks.
Steve, at one time during that study with Dr. Bush, he was just wandering around looking at outcrops and things in the streams through that whole region. And I would be surprised if he hasn't at least looked at that. And I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure he would have considered that in his boundary, but what that means, I don't know. You'd have to ask him.
Yeah.
I have a question for the greater committee here. Was anybody, I know Steve, it looked like in the early 2000s, there was a lot of changes to the basin boundary. And then in 2005, we basically left it the same in our literature. And I guess in our typical messaging to the public. Was anybody on the committee or involved at that time and remembers discussions around that, or?
I'm looking down at Mark's screen because I can't see Paul.
Yeah, Paul was around, I was around, there was a number of people around. I would suggest that it was a transition in PBAC where we hired a new executive director that then collected the data and maybe put all the little tidbits into a little better context for the boundary that we adopted at that time.
And I can weigh in on that because I came on in 2006 and I'd found the boundary the way it was in 2005. And I asked questions about how that came to be. And I never really got a satisfactory answer to that. And I was not willing to change the boundary or to recommend changing the boundary until we had technical justification for changing the boundary. And this was about the same time that a lot of things were being migrated to GIS. And so before this time, everything was a drawing or a graphic, and a change involved getting a graphic artist involved and doing that. And after this time, we were able to change things with GIS. So that 2005 boundary was like the first GIS-based boundary that PBAC used. And that's the one that's been continually used because I haven't been able to get any researchers to put the pencil on the piece of paper to draw what they think the boundary is until finally this last year we got Professor Bush to do that.
I think there was also a lot of research into private groundwater wells. It was hit and miss just before that time too.
I think Jeff kind of hits the nail on the head, as my opinion, is as long as we're kind of justifying why we're changing it and what that's based on. And a lot of good work went into this. I think it would be a good time to try and make that official change, whatever that means, and our messaging. Corey had the suggestion about possibly having the communications subcommittee talk about what implications might be associated around it. I don't know if that's something we want to explore or not. And then, of course, Steve mentioned possibly finding a way to package some of the information up so we can post that somewhere on our website and have that available in our records as to why the change took place. And I would personally like to see, at least in some of the, if we agree as a group and how we want to move forward, especially in the next annual report, if not in some of the other things that come out in the near future. It just seems like we have a lot of decent justification behind this. Paul.
Madam Chair, I would be more than welcome to work with Steve Robichaud on developing some message points on the boundary adjustments, and have something ready for our next month meeting.
Okay.
And then we'll also look at some of the collateral material out there and make sure we can update all of that. So,
Accordingly.
yeah, and just, the 2005, yeah, I think it was, we were still struggling with that boundary.
Just didn't have enough.
But I can assure you, no politics were involved, nor were any animals
Harmed.
injured during that effort.
And Kara, this is Tyler. I think I think it is a good idea to have that reviewed. I think Paul and Steve having that.
Oops. Oh, Tyler, you muted yourself mid-sentence. Maybe.
There we go. Sorry about that. And then circling back, we could have the the communication subcommittee, just have a conversation about that and about what the messaging the implications might be. I do think it is just worth taking a look at that and making sure that we take into account any externalities or any impacts that might have in our messaging. Just, I think being hypersensitive to the messaging aspect with the recognition of what that has meant in the past for previous efforts to work on this problem. I think it's a good idea for us to make sure that we take that into account.
I agree. More discussion on that topic? Anyone? Agreement, disagreement?
This is Gina. I completely agree with the way we're moving, and I think Tyler's words of wisdom are good especially in establishing our level of confidence in the boundaries with our report coming in the next few months. So I do think that it is of great value, but I do think acknowledging the fact that we are becoming more and more and more clear about the boundaries makes that a credible statement at this point, to say, okay, now in 2022, here's what our understanding is. I think that's valuable.
Yeah. The other thought that ran through my mind, and I don't know, I guess, Steve, I would follow up too. I assume you and John worked and you do have GIS boundaries for what you're displaying, but we could, I don't know if this is something the research subcommittee or Steve has recommendations, we could always do a dashed line or something in our messaging approach to help support the idea that it's some things are maybe more well-known than others. So there's creative ways I think we could go about that as well, to kind of indicate the uncertainty, but also where we do have the information to feel more confident. And Gina, I agree. It's cool to see that we actually do have a lot of data, I think, behind the changes that we're seeing in the last 15 years.
I was going to add too, before I started babbling. I think that, this is how science works. This is exactly what research brings us closer and closer and closer to, right? So the fact that we have evolved these boundaries is exactly what we're supposed to be doing. So I just think it's very positive and very, very good.
Can you guys still hear us? We're having, okay. Yeah, Paul, if you're willing to work with Steve on that, and then maybe wrote the communications subcommittee into a mini exercise of sorts and report back to the group, that would be much appreciated.
I would be more than willing to work with Steve.
Okay. Are you up for it, Steve?
Oh, yeah, always.
Okay. All right. Any further questions on this particular topic?
Steve, do we need to reimburse John Bush for some effort here, or is there further effort that we need to consider?
No, but I will like plant the seed that if he needs any kind of resources down the road, that PBAC would very likely be willing to grant him any reasonable resource that he might need to formalize things or do what he needs to take the next step.
Yeah. I think planting that seed as an option and then bringing that back to the group would be agreeable. Good question, Jeff.
Thanks, Steve.
Further discussion? Okay. So our next presentation discussion item is the PBAC transition discussion. And I'll lead into that a little bit. So Corey's last day was Friday, January 7th. And myself and Rusty and Paul, we met before she closed out that time, went through a few things, Steve as well. Made sure we had kind of the basics in place to be able to continue paying invoices. Obviously, Steve has stepped up and helped with minutes and some of the basic administrative things that need to happen to keep things moving forward. We did at our last meeting set up a PBAC transition subcommittee. That subcommittee did meet, I think it was about a week and a half ago. We have another meeting scheduled this coming Monday, and we also have another one on the books for 2 weeks from that. We're all busy, but we want to keep the process going and working towards getting another executive manager on board. We had kind of two big takeaways, I guess I would say, from that first meeting. One, we had a lot of discussion around where PBAC would be housed. And kind of the consensus of the group at the time was let's explore the route of keeping it at U of I and see how that evolves before we potentially have other options, but this is working in a lot of ways. So I'll ask Rusty to kind of chime in on where he's gone since that meeting.
Part of the discussion, like for U of I, was where would PBAC land as a whole? Does it make sense in institutional research? Does it make sense as a part of our private-public partnership with Cecilia Plenary and our P3 agreement, so forth and so on. And ultimately, the discussion was had is, the supervisory responsibilities of the committee and the group, but where it will be housed as far as hiring, recruiting, and what have you will live within our P3 arrangement. So it will live under our P3 liaison that we have here at the university, and that hasn't quite been formalized yet, but that is the general consensus as where that will land in the future.
And thanks to Rusty he's had a lot of conversations and had to do some work on that end to see that part through, and we'll continue to need to do that. And we'll be working closely with Rusty, of course, to follow hiring protocols and stuff as the process continues on. The second big piece out of that meeting, and obviously at that point, some things were up in the air, but we acknowledged the need to get a job description nailed down would be the first step. Once that gets nailed down, that can go to Rusty. He can send it to his U of I folks so that they can, rate and classify and do what they need to do with that. So I did send out the job description to the subcommittee group, asked that everybody review that closely before our coming meeting on Monday. And I'm hopeful we'll hash through a lot of things associated with that. We did have some good discussions around how the position has changed over time, right? Heavily research oriented at one point into, we're really starting to get into that action needs phase. And so I've asked everybody to be super critical about that job description and rework it at this time in a way that we think is most conducive to what PBAC needs right now. Any other discussion? Anybody else on that subcommittee have anything to add to that effect or from what they can recall? Okay. So we'll be working pretty heavily in the next couple of weeks. I'm sure at our next meeting, we'll have another update for the group as well. I mean, I think the goal would be to get somebody on board as quickly as possible, but while also being critical as to what our needs are and making sure that we're moving forward in the best manner. Paul.
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you. I want to thank Rusty for his shepherding through the U of I maze. Thank you very much. I'm pleased with the proposed outcome there, and also want to thank Steve for stepping up to help support PBAC during this time. And we're trying to be very mindful of what we put in Steve's lap. So just know that, Steve.
We lost you guys. We lost your audio if you guys can hear us.
How long ago did you lose us, Tyler?
We lost you about halfway through Paul saying that he definitely wasn't going to overburden Steve.
He nailed it.
We'll leave it.
I heard him say he was going to give extra tasks to Steve.
Oh.
Well, I do want to thank everybody involved with that process as it continues as well. So we will be reporting back to the group at the next meeting, hopefully with some quality information and next steps and maybe even the schedule, that sort of thing. Okay, I'm gonna move on. So our third discussion item here listed is a Palouse Water Alternatives Project update from Robin Nimmer with Alta Science and Engineering.
Thank you, Kara. I just want to thank Steve. I think that was a wonderful presentation, and I really like the dialogue associated with that about the boundary and documenting it and talking about what, where we're more sure than others. I think will be super helpful. So just an update on the work that we're doing. I'll start off with the outreach. And so we're really excited. Paul and I have a meeting with the Nez Perce Tribe on Monday. Or I think it's Monday. No, I guess it's Tuesday. Anyway, we have a lot of stuff going on in January. So we have a meeting with the tribe, some tribal members. So like Ken and Allison that are on the call right now, we'll meet with them. We're also planning for a SEG meeting in February, although it's not officially scheduled. That's on our radar. And then the Pullman League of Women Voters, we'll do a presentation in April for them. And then on the survey that we did, the Google poll that we did that Ashley was working on. And so Paul is going to be sharing the results of that to the Moscow Public Works Finance Committee in January. And then the Pullman City Council in February. And then the Pullman WSU Town Gown Collaborative also in January. So we have a lot going on in January about sharing about these alternatives and about the survey. Moving on to the alternatives interim steps. So we completed the capital cost memo, and then about a week ago or a week and a half ago, PBAC members should have also received the interim steps O&M memo. And if we could get any comments that you have on that by Monday, or if you're going to need a little more time, if you could let me know, or just let Steve know and he can communicate with me. The other part is the funding strategy. And although we submitted the memo a while ago, on Friday, the Idaho Water Resource Board Finance Committee had a meeting. So I listened in on that, and they had a lot of really good information on the ARPA funds, what they can be used for, what they can't be used for, and then the different tiers of different projects. So this PBAC project is on their radar, which we all know, but it felt good to see it in print on the screen. Let's see. Okay, then the fishery agency, that pre-consultation coordination. I mentioned last month we met with NMFS, National Marine Fishery Service. And then we have a meeting this next week, Paul and I, with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, as well as Jacobs. And then after we get the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, then we'll have our meetings with the state fisheries agencies. So I imagine those will be in the next couple of weeks, which will be great to really start to get to wrap this up. And then also if we need to have another meeting with the tribe, anything like fisheries specific, because this meeting that we'll have next week, I'm envisioning is going to be more of a general meeting. And then if there become some fishery specific, then we can get our fisheries gurus and have that meeting. We're also working on the matrix, And what I am hoping for, and I'm not sure who sees our memos, but there are two things. One is we're requesting a no-cost extension through May of this year, just because it's taken a while to get these fisheries meetings together. And then in order to, plug everything in then into the matrix, do the report, get it reviewed, and get it finalized, we're requesting May 31st. And then the other one is we'd like to have a workshop with PBAC, and we're looking at maybe the second week of February. So unless there are any big red flags from people, I'll send out a Google poll. And the purpose of that workshop will really be to focus, it'll be to focus on the matrix, to make sure that we have, okay, this is what we're going to use. These are the weights we're going to use. I don't anticipate changing much from what Anchor had done, but because I know you guys spent a lot of time solidifying that, but we just want to make sure, yes, this is what we want to do. And then by then we'll have several of the fisheries meetings, and we can say, these are the concerns, and just have that discussion. So we're looking at maybe our 2-hour time block. We're hoping for in person, maybe at the Best Western that second week of February. So more to come on that. So any questions?
I would ask Tyler for that contract extension. Do you need Robin's team to put something on paper for that so that the committee needs to approve it probably at the next meeting. And then it could go on to Moscow. I know we talked about it at length last time, and I have in my notes that we had to have something before this committee next February at the February meeting, basically. But do you have any direction for Robin on what you might need for that? You're still there? Did we lose Tyler?
I think we did.
All right, well, I'll circle back with him, Robin, and we'll get with you on that.
Okay, that sounds good. And
last time we had it included with the fisheries edition.
Oh, we kind of lost. Kara, we lost you.
Oh man, okay, can you hear me again?
I can, yes.
I don't know why our microphone wants to kick out. Last time when we did the update and the time extension, we also had the cost increase associated with the additional fisheries task. But I don't know if Tyler needs you to do a similar type small supplemental document that basically just asks for the time extension without the budget increase. But I'll circle back with him and you, and we'll make sure that we have what we need so it can come in front of the committee in February. Okay, Paul?
Yeah, if I could just encourage all of our feedback members to make sure they can make this feedback workshop with Robin on the matrix. It's really going to be important. We're going to try and make it convenient. 2 hours, we'll commit to that. It will be probably a late afternoon, maybe a 4 to 6 meeting. So again, we'll just stay razor focused on the matrix, just to make sure Robin stays on her schedule as well.
And in a lot of ways, if I'm reading this right, this is to help narrow down the alternatives, correct? In some ways, we would get a scoring out of the 4 different alternatives. So super important stuff to be involved with.
Great, yep. And then I just back on the contract thing, I've been in contact with Tyler just to see if it needs to go to city council approval or not. So he was gonna look into that. But I can work with Kara and Tyler on that.
Okay. And Robin, you said you were gonna send out a doodle poll for that February meeting?
Yep.
Perhaps, okay. Okay, so everybody stay tuned for that. Any questions for Robin? Further questions, discussion? No, okay.
Okay.
So, thank you, Robin. So I'm actually going to, we semi left one item off of our presentations and discussion topic, and that would be hearing from Lauren Kirkpatrick, excuse me, on the not WSU model, but the other model also has through WSU. And just as a reminder to the group, I think it would have been last spring, PBAC went ahead and decided to fund some of the summer work that Lauren was doing on that model. And so she's here today to give us an update on where that model's at. And I think you're nearing the final stages is my understanding. So we will turn it over to Lauren at this time. I'm gonna jump her up into the presentations discussion.
Hey, Kara, if I could interject, sorry about that. I had some technical glitches there and had to jump back on. Just a quick answer to your question. I don't believe that I will need, if I can just, I think I have what I need. We'll take back as a report to the council since it's just an extension of time and not a monetary extension. It shouldn't require a formal council action on that. So I think we should be good.
Okay, should we entertain a motion here today that it's okay with PBAC to extend that?
I think that would probably, yeah, that would probably be a good thing to do.
Okay, just as a reminder for the group, Robin, can you just reiterate what the current end date is set to? And then I think I caught May 31st is what you're hoping to move it to.
Correct. Yeah, our current contract goes until March 31st. So it's a two-month extension.
Okay.
So Kara, I would move that we extend the contract period for the alternate work being conducted from March 31st to May 31st.
Okay, is there a second to that motion?
Yeah.
Yes, or discussion?
I think Sean seconded.
Did you second
or
that,
else he
Sean,
coughed.
or somebody?
I did second that one. Yeah, I agree. I think the effort that it takes to coordinate that kind of a meeting with all of the players involved, it's very easy to lose time in that. So I think it's warranted in this case.
Okay, we have a second from Sean. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of Tyler's motion to extend the contract time from March 31st to May 31st on the alternative water supply study by Alta Science and Engineering, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, seeing none, that motion has passed.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler, for jumping back in on that. We thought we lost you for good. All right, moving back to Lauren. Thanks for your patience there, and we'll turn it over to Lauren. Steve, I'm guessing you can potentially share or allow Lauren to share. I presume you have some slides you want to share, Lauren, or just talk? Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I can share. Sorry, I was testing it. Yeah, I'm much calmer now. Was like freaked out that it was my model that I was like, it's incorrect, but we're good. So it's fine. I was messaging Allison. I was like, we're going to have to extend. I was like, we're going to go into the summer. It's fine, but we're good. Okay. So yeah, now we are officially coming to the end of it. My conversation with you guys is just my plan on coordinating things with you in regards to distribution. A huge thank you to everyone that has taken time out of their schedule to go over it with me, making sure that everything is accurate and that we're representing PBAC in the way that we want to with this model. Also, kind of one point that I would love to just put out there for you guys based on the conversation I've heard in this meeting is in regards to the boundary changes, all of the information that I get from the local residents, I'm happy to pass on to you as to what they are looking for in a communication regarding these scientific discoveries, so that when you guys do come up with those plans of how you want to present these boundary changes, or if you do, you can use that information of how you want to, go forward with that stuff. So that will be available to you, as well as, the alternative information as well.
Great.
Okay, so very basic slides here. So my plan of action right now is to kind of just work with the social media intern that you guys have and devise a campaign with PBAC and with your stakeholder engagement group of getting this on your website and getting it to the residents that participated in your last survey. The format that I've decided would be easiest in distributing this is a website that I've created that I'm happy to show to you guys as well. In addition to putting it on your guys' website, I will also be contacting some of my contacts at the following organizations that are listed here. So I'm currently on the Pullman 2040 environmental task, so I'll be coordinating with them. PCD, Palouse Land Trust, the Sierra Club. And this, all of the things in here that have question marks are questions for you guys. So if you have any other ideas of any large organizations that you think would be willing or would be open to posting this website on their site or just handing out to their members, please feel free to let me know right now, I guess, and I can add them in.
This is Eileen from City of Pullman. How about the League of Women Voters? Seems how they've expressed interest in
Yeah.
keeping up.
Yeah, both Moscow and Pullman
Yeah.
groups have been relatively interested.
Perfect. I can do that.
Lauren, PCEI will definitely share stuff.
Awesome. Thank you.
Our two chambers, and Lauren, we can talk offline about some of those other outlets.
Okay, perfect. And then I know we have some representatives for the city, so I was just maybe seeing or testing the water if we can put this on the city website.
Yeah, Lauren, maybe Sean has some updated information on that, but we are supposedly onboarding a communications coordinator for City of Pullman. It's a new position.
Okay.
So you would want to get in touch with that person and see where that's at. Sean, do you have anything else to contribute there?
No, I don't have anything more to add there, but more to follow once we get that person on board.
Okay.
And Lauren, you can just coordinate that with me for the city of Moscow, and we certainly would be willing to share.
Who is that?
Yep.
Oh, that's Tyler. Okay,
That will do the same thing, Lauren.
awesome.
Yeah, and for Pullman too, we, in the interim, I don't know exactly when, did you say when you were planning to distribute this? But we have some social media avenues that we've done with like the PBAC survey, and I'm sure we can share there as well.
Awesome. And also you guys should have all my, you should have my email. If not, I can always put it in the chat at the very end. If you come up with any other ones, feel free to let me know and I can reach out to them. Or, I mean, word of mouth, if you guys are comfortable with it or you're part of other organizations, you're welcome to share the website. You'll have access to it as soon as we get it all published, and which will probably be next week. So these are just some of the groups.
Well, and county website too. I mean, you have city websites, but city/county websites.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd for sure be doing that.
Who was that talking?
That was Tom Lamar, Latah County Commissioner.
Okay, thank you.
I would think, Lauren, if
Sorry about that.
we can probably distribute when it's ready information to this PBAC group, and having sat in on this conversation, us Pullman folks, Moscow folks, county folks can distribute out from there as well.
That is perfect. Okay.
And Lauren,
Paul real quick has something to say.
yeah, Lauren, what we talked about is we'd have some little bit of a text box to kind of explain what the revisioning tool is, and then the link. So I'll work with you on that.
On a message, go with it. Okay.
Perfect. And then, so I'll be distributing it to Washington State students. I'll be distributing it to my students within the interface and within the survey. There will be an indication where people can categorize themselves as resident or student. So the feedback from students who are not permanent residents, I can divvy up that information and just provide you just with the resident information. But to get a big enough response, I will be distributing it to students. So I'll be focusing on marketing and design classes as well as environmental science classes. I will also be bugging all of my fellow WSU faculty and staff that I work with and all of my friends in other departments to take this and give it to all their friends. My one kind of weakness in regards to the university connections is I don't have any U of I connections besides Jan. And he is over here now, but he has his friends over at U of I. So if anyone with U of I would like to connect with me or maybe provide me with any classes that you think would be interested in providing this as an extra credit or something to look at for research, I'd be open to that as well.
Yeah, Lauren, I can give you some ideas. There's a bunch of, I think, good environmental sciences courses.
Okay. Sorry, who was that? I can't see it.
Sorry, that was Tim.
Okay. Tim Link, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All Okay, I will email you after this, Tim, so that's perfect. I was also thinking about distributing some informational flyers around town with a QR code to the website. I was thinking primarily just coffee shops, maybe some grocery stores, any hotspots. Any other kind of ideas of where to post that. I also wanted to check in if you guys wanted them just posted in Moscow or Pullman, or if you guys even want the flyers up and around.
I think wherever you want to promote it. Push it out. Is there you said it would designate between student and resident. Does it
Yeah.
also designate on location? Like where you're like
Whether you're Pullman.
whether you're Pullman or Moscow or
outside.
county?
It doesn't currently right now, just based on my restrictions from the internal review board, but I can ask them if I can get that information. I think it should be fine as long as I'm not allowed to get names.
That might be an interesting statistic to add into the mix if it was possible.
Yeah, I can ask about that. I'll email them today. Okay.
And there was a comment, Lauren, just so you can see it down here from Sam Gallagher. Kara Whitman at WSU teaches environmental science also, if you need help making that connection.
Yeah, no, I'll be, yeah, Kara, I've already bothered her enough at her office about getting into her class.
Perfect. I just wanted to make sure you saw that comment.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And then kind of the last thing that I wanted to just show you guys. So as of right now, I'll be publishing the interfaces on the IC system website, which allows individuals that don't have Stella software to look at it tomorrow or the beginning of next week, now that I've gone through the finalized steps with Paul and Robin and Corey. It will be available to the public through the end of February or mid-March. It all kind of depends on how many responses are gathered. I'm looking for primarily responses from the public. So I would like a greater ratio of that to students, but it's kind of just going to depend. And I also need to save me about a month to write. So it's got to end sometime in March. But I can go ahead and show you my website here that I've created. That is my, okay, so this website will be distributed through this URL, pretty easy. They'll come to this page, Palouse Basin Aquifer Revisioning Tool. They'll have the channels up here. So on about, it just talks about how communication can be a struggle regarding natural resource policy. Here on the Palouse, we have a great opportunity to not only gauge public opinion as you guys are making these decisions going forward, but also look how we can improve as communicators. So just gives a little background in terms of what the project is all about. As we scroll down, you'll get a bio about myself. So individuals who are taking part of the survey and the simulation, they'll be able to get to know me. They'll also get to know Allison. She is still sending me her bio, but she's pretty busy. So that's our about page. As we scroll over to interfaces, this just simply talks about why there are two interfaces, what's inside of them, and just kind of a brief little overview. I also have a disclaimer of beginning. Before you begin, they need to read our IRB disclaimer, which simply just says that you're taking this completely voluntary. Everything will be kept anonymous, the purpose of the research and all of that good stuff. And then further down below, you have interface A and interface B. Individuals in above here are told that it doesn't really matter which one they choose. They're able to choose it. It's the same content. It's just presented differently. They're able to go through both if they like, just one if they like, kind of however they want to do it. These will take them directly to the interfaces. I did publish A just so you guys can see it. For the time being, it'll take them right to it, and then they'll start scrolling through it. So the last page on here is our contact page. I did put Steve, I don't know if Steve, you still want that on there with everything that's on your plate right now too. But it just has the general contact information. So your email, phone number, just for aquifer questions or comments, I have that information. I have your guys' Facebook and your website as well. And then any sort of communication-based questions or comments can be directed here. They can also easily just input their question here if they have any problems or comments. So yeah, that's about it. I kind of went through that fast. You guys have any questions?
Paul?
Hey, Lauren, thank you. Just a quick one, based on our earlier conversation about the basin boundaries.
Yes,
Yeah, in interface A, you show the current boundary
I do.
map. And I'm just kind of curious as to the flavor of the committee. If we're comfortable with this, I know given the time, Lauren's got to launch. So I would suggest we just hold with this boundary for her work. I mean, this is her master's thesis, and we've got to let her succeed with that. So I would just say, let's just let Lauren go with this boundary.
Yeah, and I don't think we've formalized enough to formally push anything different. So I would agree.
Okay.
Further discussion on that group?
Cite the source and date.
Yeah,
Label there.
yeah, yep. Source and date would be one way to do that. That's a good idea.
I can add that in.
Yeah, which is probably our last published.
It is, yeah. Or I think it was from your 2018.
Yeah.
18 or 19, yeah.
Yeah, this also, so the nice thing about this is that if there are really kind of glaring problems that people are encountering when going through the simulation, it's a fluid base that I can just change out. So if you guys tomorrow kind of vote, I don't want this to be our boundary anymore, we can change it. And then I can always add kind of oh, this might look different. What does this mean? And it just has a button that will take you to an informational page that you guys might have, or the paper of John's if they want it, so. But yeah, if you guys, if this is fine, then that's great. I would just.
Well, I think, Paul, you said you were gonna put together a little disclaimer of sorts too, to go along with any email. I mean, I think that covers I think even Gina said it earlier, where this is research and things are ever evolving. So we do the best that we can to be as up to date as possible. But things will hopefully be different in a couple of months and we can just move forward. Questions for Lauren? Yeah, I think this is really cool. I'm excited to poke around it myself actually and take a look at it. I'm a little bit intrigued by the two interfaces. I might have to take both.
Yeah, they are definitely, they're definitely presented differently through different lenses. So if you guys have the time, feel free to go through both, and you're able to give comments at the end if you prefer interface A or interface B. And there's more, I guess, explicit questions in there of talking about what you prefer when you see communication like this. So I'm excited for you guys to take it and get some feedback for you.
Yeah, and thanks to Paul and Ashley and Steve. I know you guys have been involved a lot with Lauren and helping look over all this. So thank you guys for your time there.
And Lauren, as we've talked selfishly, we can, once you get through your academic work, we can certainly look at this and repurpose it once we get through Robin's work. So I think again, that's what you learn through your work, I think will help us communicate in the future. around Robin's work, for sure.
Yeah, because you guys definitely have used this model for a while. It's been around since 2008. So the only thing that would really require you guys to have this platform continue to be a source of communication is just a subscription to Stella software. And then you just kind of alter the interface platform to meet your needs. And it's a great way to easily change things out and improve communication and let people kind of see how the behavior of the aquifer is working. So.
Great. Thank you, Lauren, for all your great work.
Thanks.
Other questions, comments for Lauren?
I just had a comment, Lauren. I've done some surveys with municipalities, and I got a lot of traction with responses by using the city's e-blast. Like, I don't know if Moscow and Pullman have a digital newsletter, but I got on pretty good hit rate on using those. And I don't know if Moscow Daily Pullman would allow you to like post your like a tiny URL on their Facebook page or something, but those
Yeah,
might be a few ways for getting some links out.
that would be perfect. I will make a note of that and reach out to them. Thank you.
All right. Okay. I don't see any further discussion. Thank you, Lauren, for joining us today. Again, all your hard work. I hope your launch goes well. We will move on to unfinished business, and we'll start with our subcommittee updates. And I'll open the floor to Sean and see if he has any sort of update on the research subcommittee.
Sure. I'd just like to echo some of the things that were said earlier. Steve, thank you again for all your great work looking at the boundary. But what this group didn't get to see that the research subcommittee did get to see was a review of the modeling that had been done to date as well. And that really led into a review of the recent WSU modeling work that was done, the Nick Engdahl model. And a lot of the research subcommittee members put together comments on that model and sent them back to Nick. So Nick has all of those comments. He's working on responding to those, and he's working with the PhD student that was working under him, Ben Kofer, to get that response done. I've not seen that back from him yet, but I expect that here in the next month or so. And if not, I will follow up with Nick.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Paul, we've talked a lot about some of the communications, but a quick breeze over.
Thanks, Kara. Yeah, just updating, again, we shared with the committee the polling results, and encourage you to share those out with your respective leadership and council. We thought it would be valuable for us to get in front of those elected officials if they had specific questions. Again, so we really wanted to have that happen before we did any sort of public blast on the findings. I think as we shared last month, a couple of the high level findings, again, about 80% of the respondents of the 306 respondents, 80% reside within Moscow Pullman. At least that's where they identified. Good cross section in both communities. High level findings, again, were a lot of interest in more water conservation, as well as growth and development, and how might we affect some of that development with some good water management practices. So some really good insight and remarks or verbatim comments. So I'd encourage you to take some time and read through those. Really good stuff, very thoughtful. The public is engaging more than we know, and I think we need to both appreciate it and really continue to build on that. So we have a lot of eyes on this committee and the work we do, and I see that increasing going forward. The work we do becomes even more important. We were supposed to present last Friday to the Idaho Water Resource Board. We got bumped off of that busy agenda, and so Neely Miller from IDWR is going to let me know. It will likely be on their next agenda, so I'll keep you posted what that looks like. Again, just I did provide a little update to Neely that he shares out with his folks internally at the department as well as the board. So they got just a verbal update. So watch for more on that. And then, like I said earlier, we're going to schedule a SEG meeting in mid-February. We're going to give them an opportunity to look at the poll findings as well as share out Lauren's work, and maybe have Lauren walk through some of that and get some additional feedback from them. Encourage them to promote that out with their colleagues, friends, family, etc. And I think that's all.
That's,
Paul, you and I are on the agenda for Monday's Public Works Finance Committee meeting for the city of Moscow on the 24th to present the survey findings.
Yep, thanks, Tyler. And then Pullman City Council, February 14th.
sounds right. Yep. You
Thanks,
just
Sean and
say
Kara, for
that's
that.
all, but that sounds like an
That's all.
awful lot.
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Paul. Budget planning, there may not be much to
No, I
add.
mean, we did meet with the group, late November, early December, prior, when Corey was still in her role. Great dialogue around how we want to see the budget reported out moving forward in the future. Unfortunately, we didn't get to that point with Corey moving on, but with the new executive manager position coming into place and also with the subcommittee group, I made a note here to kind of call that group together to better understand how we want to move forward with a report out from that standpoint, with our committee members and our community members who engage in this process.
Is your take, my understanding was there was a draft budget report, or would you prefer to take the preference to not finalize that and wait till we get an executive manager on board?
I would agree with that.
Okay.
I would agree with that.
And then update potentially 2 years at one time, or however that plays out, but address the comments that the group came about. Okay, perfect. Great. Any questions for any of the subcommittee groups? Anything related to those anyone has? All right, so we will move on to our next agenda item, which is the budget. And Steve, do you have any numbers to present on that one, or are we going to be?
Yeah, I do. I don't know whether you want the depth that I'll do, but let me show you what I found.
Let's give it a go. I've never seen a Steve budget report, so.
It's not a Steve budget report, it's a UI budget report.
Pam Hilliard report.
Let's see. Okay, this is the admin budget. Everybody see that?
Yes.
163,000 carried over from the account from last year into this fiscal year. 100,000 went out of that account to pay for salaries, so that lives in the salary budget now.
Okay.
$45,679 has been spent fiscal year to date on work orders, and work orders are where most of the budget gets spent. The rest of this stuff, membership, dues, travel, that's Corey and the training that she's been doing. There's one thing in here, this $179 is for telephone charges for the office on campus. And this one here is money that's come in, and the receipts so far only total $33,750 to the admin budget. And I think that's UI's admin and Whitman County. So we don't have anything yet from Moscow, Pullman, or WSU. And I don't know when the invoices went out and when we would expect payments to come in, but I'll update you when they come in. But so far, we don't really have anything except UI and Whitman. If folks have paid, let me know, and I'll try to get them to chase it down, but they haven't seen any checks yet.
I am going to follow up with UI research. One thing that's not noted in here is any comp payout that would have been for her vacation.
Okay, so there could be another item.
It's going to be pretty significant.
Okay. Could everybody hear Rusty?
Yeah, I heard him.
Okay.
And Steve, I just got that invoice emailed. I saw that come through. It's either late last week or early this week. So I think you should be getting our check probably cut yesterday. So it should be hitting your mailbox soon.
Okay, thanks, Tyler.
Okay.
And Steve, I'll say the same thing for Pullman. Recently signed that approval as well, so that should be there shortly.
Okay.
I'll figure out what happened to WSU.
Okay, that's the admin. If we look at the work orders, we've got a City of Moscow, 7,000 up here, and then 2,000 and 1,000. Those are for Ashley's internship, 10,000. We have the Alta for the water supply alternative, all these Alta invoices. This chunk of City of Moscow is for the USGS monitoring. This GovFriend LLC is for the LEAP analysis. And Conservation Mart is for the conservation devices. So that's the kind of the money that's gone out on work orders this fiscal year. Okay. Research budget, 256,715 carried over from last year, and there haven't been any expenditures, new research expenditures this fiscal year, so it's still at that level. The budget, the salary budget, which took the 100,520 out of the admin account, has expensed 50,658. Now that Corey's no longer around, that won't be going up very quickly, just my hourly rate, in addition to any vacation payout that she might have. So I assume that that's where this will come from, the 61,000 remaining in the salary budget. I'm not sure, Rusty.
No, you're correct, Steve.
Okay. So that's the budget as it stands. There's also a discretionary account that holds $2,134. I think that's for PBAC executive manager to spend as he or she or they see fit. I'm not quite sure what the constraints are on that. It wasn't there when I was there. So those are the PBAC budgets.
Those are nice budgets there.
Yeah. Okay, that was perfect, Steve. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Questions for Steve on budget? Anyone? All right. Well,
Kara, just one quick comment. I am working with SGS trying to get the monitoring equipment back from them. We'll update the committee as we work our way through that.
perfect. Thank you, Tyler. I have that as a note to check in with you on, but you beat me to it. So thank you. And just so the committee remembers, we decided not to continue that monitoring, but PBAC put in money to buy the turbidity meter associated with it. So the hope is that we can acquire that back in case we want to use it in the future and potentially save a cost there without having to repurchase anything. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 7, which is other reports and announcements as time allows. I don't have anything specific to add other than that I hope to see everybody at next month's PBAC meeting, which is scheduled for Thursday, February 17th, 2022, presumably in the same room or also online. Like we had this last time, moving forward, it does sound like we'll have to have the PBAC password to sign into any of these meetings. And I'll circle back to the calendar, and I don't know exactly how we'll go about it, but if Corey had a reoccurring one scheduled, we'll find a way to remove that and maybe make the login process a little smoother next time around.
Kara, I have one other, if I may.
You may.
Okay, one more screen share here. I have the preliminary numbers for 2021 pumping.
Oh.
There they are. These are preliminary, so what I need is for each pumping entity to verify that the number that's up there is correct. So I'll send this slide to each of the entities, and I'd like, if possible, for folks to get back to me within a week about yay or nay. And if you don't give me a nay, I'll just assume it's correct. In total, 2021 was 11% higher than 2020.
Yeah.
And Pullman has a surprisingly, or a higher number than was expected from that presentation I gave in September. So unless that number changes, they may have actually, for the first time since the management plan started, exceeded their ceiling. Moscow's done that several times over the course of the years, but not in recent years. But Pullman has grown enough to the point where they're just always bumping up against that ceiling. And so I think this year they may have gone over.
Yeah.
Warm, dry summer.
Over the last 10 years. So yeah, we'll definitely take a peek at those if you want to send that out, Steve.
Will do.
Entities can each confirm, cross-check back to what they have on file. Okay, any other announcements? Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Kara, I move that we adjourn the meeting.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, seconded by Jeff, I think, who that was. All right, all those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you all for a wonderful meeting, hanging in there. We'll see you next time and hopefully at the PBAC retreat, whenever that gets scheduled.
So.
Right,
Y'all.
bye.
Thanks.